Sarah Mitchell stood at the kitchen window of her small farmhouse, watching the endless Texas prairie stretch toward the horizon. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, but it no longer brought her comfort. 3 months had passed since they buried her husband Thomas beneath the old oak tree behind their home, and the world felt empty without his steady presence. At 28, Sarah had never imagined she would be alone on this remote piece of land, 40 miles from the nearest town. When she and Thomas had claimed this homestead 5 years ago, they had dreamed of building something lasting together. They would raise cattle, grow crops, and fill their home with children's laughter. Thomas had been strong and capable, always ready with a joke when times got tough. He could fix anything with his hands and had a way of making even the hardest days feel manageable. The fever had taken him quickly. One day he was helping their neighbor repair a fence, and 3 days later he was gone. The doctor from town arrived too late, shaking his head sadly as he examined Thomas's still form. Sarah had sat beside the bed for hours afterward, holding her husband's cold hand and wondering how she was supposed to continue without him. Now the daily tasks that once seemed simple felt overwhelming. The cattle needed tending, but she struggled to manage them alone. The roof leaked in 2 places, and she had no idea how to fix it. Worst of all, the loneliness pressed down on her like a physical weight. Some days she went from sunrise to sunset without hearing another human voice. Her nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, lived 8 miles away. They had offered to help after the funeral, but Sarah's pride made it difficult to accept charity. She had always been independent, even as a young girl back in Missouri. Her father had taught her to rely on herself, and asking for help felt like admitting defeat. The evenings were the hardest. She would sit on the front porch where she and Thomas used to watch the sunset together, and the silence felt deafening. Sometimes she talked to him aloud, telling him about her day or asking his advice about farm decisions. She knew it was foolish, but it made her feel less alone. Money was becoming a serious concern. Thomas had handled most of their finances, and Sarah discovered they had less saved than she had thought. The cattle were their main source of income, but several had wandered off and she couldn't round them up by herself. She had tried to hire help from town, but most men were reluctant to work for a woman, especially one who couldn't pay much. Sleep came fitfully. Every night sound made her jump, whether it was an owl hooting or a coyote calling in the distance. Thomas had always made her feel safe, but now every shadow seemed threatening. She kept his rifle by the bed, though she wasn't sure she would have the courage to use it if the need arose. During the day she tried to stay busy. She tended her small vegetable garden, mended clothes, and attempted to maintain the farmhouse. But her heart wasn't in any of it. Everything reminded her of Thomas. His coffee cup still sat on the kitchen table where he had left it that last morning. His work clothes hung in their bedroom closet, still carrying his scent. Some well-meaning folks from town had suggested she sell the farm and move back east to live with relatives. Her sister in St. Louis had written several letters begging her to come home. But this land held all her memories of Thomas. Leaving felt like abandoning him all over again. The isolation was taking its toll on her spirit. She found herself crying at unexpected moments, overwhelmed by grief and fear. Sometimes she would stand in the middle of their bedroom and scream, just to break the terrible silence. Other times she felt so numb she wondered if she was still alive at all. One particularly difficult evening, as rain pounded against the windows and wind howled around the house, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't continue living this way. She would give herself 1 more month to make the farm work, and if she couldn't manage it alone, she would accept defeat and leave Texas forever. The next morning brought clearer skies, but Sarah's mood remained dark. She walked to Thomas's grave and knelt beside the simple wooden cross she had made for him. "I don't know how to do this without you," she whispered. "I'm trying to be strong, but I'm failing at everything." As she spoke, she noticed fresh tracks in the mud around the grave. They weren't from any animal she recognized, and they were too small to belong to a horse. The prints looked almost like bare human feet, but that seemed impossible. Who would be walking around her property without shoes? The discovery unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She had enough problems without worrying about strangers lurking around her home. That night, she double-checked all the locks and kept the rifle close at hand. But as she lay in bed listening to the night sounds, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since Thomas's death, she wasn't thinking only about her grief. The mysterious tracks had sparked something in her that she thought was gone forever. Curiosity. She didn't know it yet, but those tracks would change everything about her lonely existence on the Texas frontier. Someone was watching over her, someone who understood loss and solitude in ways she couldn't imagine. Soon her desperate prayers to be left alone would be answered in the most unexpected way possible, and she would learn that sometimes help comes from the most unlikely sources. The widow's tears would eventually dry, but not in the way she expected. Her story was just beginning, and the next chapter would challenge everything she thought she knew about survival, kindness, and the meaning of home. The following morning, Sarah decided to investigate the mysterious tracks more carefully. Armed with Thomas's rifle and wearing her heaviest boots, she walked slowly around the perimeter of their property. The rain had softened the ground, making it easier to spot any disturbances. What she found made her heart race with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. The tracks circled her entire homestead, always staying just beyond the fence line. They appeared to come from the north, where the land rose into rocky hills and disappeared into a creek bed about a mile south of her house. Most disturbing of all, the tracks seemed to avoid certain areas completely, as if whoever made them knew exactly where to step to remain hidden. Sarah had lived on the frontier long enough to recognize different types of footprints. These were definitely human, but unlike any she had seen before. The feet were narrow and left deeper impressions at the ball and toe, suggesting someone who moved very quietly and deliberately. There were no signs of boots or shoes, which seemed impossible given the rough terrain filled with thorns and sharp rocks. As she followed the trail, she noticed other peculiar details. Small piles of stones had been arranged in seemingly random patterns near her water well. Branches had been broken from certain trees in a way that looked intentional rather than caused by wind or animals. Most puzzling of all, she found what appeared to be offerings left on tree stumps, a few wild flowers, smooth river stones, and a single black feather. The rational part of her mind tried to find logical explanations. Perhaps a drifter was camping nearby and didn't want to disturb her. Maybe someone from town was checking on her from a distance, too shy or respectful to approach directly. But these theories didn't explain the bare feet or the strange arrangements of natural objects. That afternoon, while hanging laundry on the line behind her house, Sarah felt the distinct sensation of being watched. She turned quickly, scanning the tree line and rocky outcroppings, but saw nothing unusual. The feeling persisted throughout the day, making her jumpy and distracted. Every time she looked over her shoulder, she expected to see someone, but the landscape remained empty. Sleep became even more elusive. She found herself listening intently to every sound outside her window. Around midnight, she heard something that made her blood run cold, the soft sound of footsteps on her front porch. Sarah grabbed the rifle and crept to the window, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure whoever was outside could hear it. Through the thin curtains, she could see a shadow moving across the porch. It paused near her front door, and for a terrifying moment she thought someone was going to try to enter her house. Instead, the shadow moved away, disappearing into the darkness as silently as it had arrived. In the morning, Sarah found another mystery waiting for her. Sitting on her porch step was a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside, she discovered fresh meat that had been expertly cleaned and prepared, along with several edible roots and berries. There was no note or explanation, just the silent gift of food. Fear warred with gratitude in her chest. Someone was definitely watching her, but their intentions seemed benevolent rather than threatening. The meat was fresher than anything she could have prepared herself, and the roots and berries showed knowledge of local plants that most settlers lacked. She thought about the stories Thomas used to tell about the Comanche bands that sometimes passed through the area. Most settlers feared them, but Thomas had always spoken with respect about their skills as hunters and their deep knowledge of the land. Could it be possible that one of them was leaving these gifts? The idea seemed both frightening and impossible. Relations between settlers and Comanche in this part of Texas were complicated and often hostile. Most encounters ended in violence or theft. Why would a Comanche warrior show kindness to a lone white woman? Over the next few days, Sarah found herself paying closer attention to her surroundings. She began to notice things she had overlooked before: which plants the mysterious visitor had harvested, how they moved across the landscape without leaving obvious trails, and the careful way they approached her property to avoid startling her livestock. Despite her fear, curiosity began to override caution. She started leaving small tokens of her own: fresh biscuits wrapped in cloth, a cup of coffee that stayed warm for hours, and once, daringly, a note that simply said thank you written in her careful handwriting. The gifts always disappeared by morning, usually replaced with something else, medicinal herbs, perfectly shaped arrowheads, or small carved objects made from wood or bone. Each offering seemed to be chosen specifically for her needs. When she developed a cough from the damp weather, she found a bundle of plants that, when brewed into tea, soothed her throat. When her axe handle broke, she discovered a replacement handle that fit perfectly. Sarah began to realize that her mysterious benefactor was not just watching her from a distance. They seemed to understand her daily struggles and challenges in ways that suggested careful, prolonged observation. This person knew when she was sick, when her tools broke, and what food she lacked. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she found it oddly comforting. For the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel completely alone. Someone cared about her welfare, even if they chose to help from the shadows. She started talking aloud more often, not just to Thomas's memory, but to her unseen guardian. While working in her garden, she would describe her daily tasks and concerns, hoping her words carried on the wind to whoever was listening. She began to feel less like a woman losing her mind with grief, and more like someone engaged in a strange but meaningful conversation. The fear that had consumed her since Thomas's death slowly began to transform into something else, anticipation. Each morning brought the possibility of new gifts, new signs that someone was thinking of her welfare. For the first time in months, she had a reason to wake up beyond mere survival. Sarah didn't know that hidden in the hills above her farm, a young Comanche warrior named Silent Fox had been watching her struggle with growing concern. His own recent losses had created an understanding of grief that transcended the boundaries between their peoples. Soon their silent exchange of gifts would lead to something neither of them expected, a connection that would challenge everything both had been taught about trust, survival, and the possibility of finding family in the most unlikely places. In the hills overlooking Sarah's farm, a young Comanche warrior named Silent Fox crouched motionless among the rocks, watching the widow struggle with a broken wagon wheel. For 3 weeks now, he had observed her daily routine, and each day brought new evidence of her declining situation. Today, her remaining cattle had wandered far from the homestead, and she was attempting to chase them down with a wagon that could barely roll. Silent Fox was not supposed to be here. His band had moved north following the buffalo herds, leaving him behind to recover from wounds received in a recent raid. But instead of rejoining his people as planned, he had become fascinated by this solitary white woman who spoke to the wind and left small offerings on tree stumps as if she understood the old ways. He had first discovered her property while tracking a wounded deer. The animal had led him close to her fence line, where he witnessed something that stopped him in his tracks. The woman was kneeling beside a fresh grave, speaking in a voice so filled with pain that he recognized it immediately. He had made those same sounds 4 months ago when fever took his wife and infant son during the harsh winter. Grief was a language that needed no translation. In her raw anguish, he saw his own struggle to continue living after losing everything that gave life meaning. The resemblance was so striking that he felt compelled to watch over her, even though every instinct told him to avoid contact with settlers. Silent Fox had earned his name as a child because of his ability to move without sound and his preference for observing rather than speaking. Even among his own people, he was known for his quiet nature and careful attention to detail. These skills made him an excellent scout and hunter, but they also made him sensitive to things others might miss. He noticed how the woman's movements had become slower and more uncertain since he first saw her. She often forgot to secure her chicken coop at night, leaving her birds vulnerable to predators. Her garden showed signs of neglect, with weeds overtaking the vegetables she would need to survive the coming winter. Most concerning of all, she sometimes stood motionless for long periods, staring at nothing, as if her spirit was slowly leaving her body. The decision to help her had not been easy. Silent Fox knew the risks involved in revealing his presence to any white settler. His people had suffered greatly from broken treaties and violent encounters with those who claimed this land. Most of his warrior brothers would consider his actions betrayal, or at least dangerous foolishness. But something about this woman reminded him of his grandmother, who had taught him that kindness was a form of strength, not weakness. The truly brave she used to say, are those who help even when it serves no purpose but compassion. His grandmother had been killed 3 years ago when soldiers attacked their winter camp, but her words continued to guide his actions. The gifts he left were carefully chosen based on his observations of her needs. When he saw her struggle to hunt small game, he brought fresh meat from his own successful hunts. When her tools broke, he crafted replacements using skills passed down through generations of his people. Each offering was a small act of defiance against the hatred that existed between their worlds. Silent Fox had been surprised and touched when she began leaving gifts in return. The bread she baked was unlike anything in his traditional diet, but it was made with clear intention and care. Her notes, though he could not read the white man's writing, were obviously meant as communication. He kept them carefully wrapped in doeskin, understanding their importance even without knowing their meaning. What moved him most was how she had begun talking aloud during her daily work. Her voice carried on the wind as she tended her garden or repaired her fence, and though he understood few of her words, the tone conveyed loneliness, determination, and gradually, a growing sense of hope. She was talking to him, he realized, even though she had never seen his face. As days passed, Silent Fox found himself taking greater risks to help her. When her cattle wandered too far, he would quietly herd them back toward her property under cover of darkness. When storms threatened, he would secure loose items around her homestead while she slept. He even killed a rattlesnake that had taken up residence near her water well, leaving the dead snake where she would find it as a warning. The work was becoming more dangerous as other travelers occasionally passed through the area. Twice he had been forced to hide for hours while white men visited her farm, and once a small cavalry patrol had camped nearby for 2 days. Each time he worried that his presence might be discovered and bring trouble to both of them, but his greatest concern was for the woman's emotional state. Even with his help, she seemed to be losing the will to continue. He watched her sit by the grave for longer periods each day, and sometimes he saw her looking toward the horizon as if contemplating leaving this place forever. The thought of her abandoning the farm filled him with unexpected sadness. Silent Fox had lost his own home when his band was forced to flee after a failed treaty negotiation. The valley where he had been born, where his wife and child were buried, was now occupied by settlers who had no knowledge of what the land had meant to his people. Watching Sarah's potential departure stirred up his own feelings of displacement and loss. One evening, as he prepared to make his usual circuit around her property, Silent Fox noticed something different about the woman's behavior. She was standing in her doorway holding a rifle, but not in a defensive posture. Instead, she seemed to be presenting it as an offering, placing it carefully on her porch step before retreating inside. The gesture stunned him. She was showing trust by making herself vulnerable, indicating that she no longer feared his presence. The rifle was clearly meant as a gift, but more than that, it was an invitation for more direct contact. For hours, Silent Fox remained hidden in the rocks, wrestling with a decision that could change both their lives forever. He could continue helping from the shadows, maintaining the safety of distance. Or he could take the enormous risk of revealing himself to a white woman who might react with fear or worse, betrayal. As dawn approached, he found himself moving down from the hills toward her farm. His grandmother's voice seemed to whisper on the morning breeze. The truly brave are those who help even when it serves no purpose but compassion. Perhaps it was time to discover whether courage and kindness could bridge the gap between two very different worlds. Sarah woke before dawn with a strange sense of anticipation. She had left Thomas's rifle on the porch the night before, along with a note she hoped might communicate her gratitude, even if her mysterious guardian couldn't read English. After weeks of exchanging silent gifts, she felt ready to take a bigger step toward making contact. She dressed quickly and prepared coffee, making extra in case her visitor might want to share it. Through her kitchen window, she could see the porch where she had left the rifle. Her heart jumped when she noticed the weapon was gone, replaced by something wrapped in beautifully worked leather. Fighting both excitement and nervousness, Sarah stepped outside into the cool morning air. The leather bundle contained the most extraordinary knife she had ever seen. The blade was perfectly balanced and sharp enough to cut paper, while the handle was decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and whites. Beside it lay a small piece of bark with symbols carved into its surface. She couldn't read the symbols, but their careful execution suggested they were meant as communication. As she traced the markings with her finger, a movement near the tree line caught her eye. For a moment she thought it might be a deer, but then she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. A man stepped out from behind the large oak tree, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. He was clearly Comanche, tall and lean with long black hair and clothing made from animal hides. What struck her most was his face, young but marked by the same kind of deep sadness she recognized in her own mirror. Sarah's first instinct was fear, but something about his posture held her in place. He stood completely still, his hands visible and empty, his expression calm but watchful. He was close enough that she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, but far enough away that she didn't feel immediately threatened. They stared at each other across the yard for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah's mind raced through everything she had been taught about Comanche warriors, most of it frightening, but this man had been helping her for weeks without asking for anything in return. He could have hurt her countless times if that had been his intention. Slowly, carefully, Sarah raised one hand in what she hoped was a peaceful gesture. The man responded by placing his right hand over his heart, then extending it toward her in what seemed like a formal greeting. When she tried to copy the gesture, she saw something that surprised her, the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you," she said aloud, holding up the beautiful knife. She repeated the word several times, pointing to various gifts she had received over the past weeks. Though he probably couldn't understand her words, she hoped her tone would convey her meaning. The man listened intently, then began to make hand signs that were clearly meant as communication. His movements were graceful and precise, but Sarah could only shake her head apologetically to show she didn't understand. Frustrated with the language barrier, she pointed to herself and said clearly, "Sarah." To her amazement, the man pointed to himself and made a sound that was barely above a whisper. "Silent Fox." His voice was deeper than she had expected, with an accent that made the English word sound musical. The fact that he knew any English at all surprised her. "Silent Fox," she repeated, and was rewarded with a definite smile this time. He nodded and pointed to her again with a questioning look. "Sarah," she said again, more slowly. Their first conversation consisted mainly of pointing and simple words, but somehow they managed to communicate basic ideas. Silent Fox indicated the farm with sweeping gestures, then made signs that seemed to ask if she was alone. When she nodded sadly, his expression grew more sympathetic. Sarah wanted to tell him about Thomas, about her loneliness and fears, but she didn't know how to explain such complex emotions with simple words and gestures. Instead, she led him to Thomas's grave and knelt beside it, hoping he would understand. Silent Fox knelt beside her, and to her surprise, he began to speak in his own language. Though she couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakably a prayer or blessing. When he finished, he touched the wooden cross gently, then looked at her with such compassion that tears sprang to her eyes. In halting English mixed with hand signs, he managed to convey that he too had lost someone important. He pointed to himself, then made a cradling motion that suggested a baby, followed by gestures that clearly indicated death. His wife and child, Sarah realized, feeling her heart break for this stranger who understood her pain so intimately. They sat by Thomas's grave in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds united by the universal experience of loss. For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah didn't feel alone with her grief. Here was someone who truly understood what it meant to have your entire life torn away in an instant. When Silent Fox finally stood to leave, Sarah felt panic rise in her chest. She didn't want him to disappear back into the hills, possibly forever. "Will you come back?" she asked, using simple words and hopeful gestures. He seemed to understand her question and nodded slowly. Then he pointed to the sun and made signs that suggested he would return when it reached a certain position in the sky. Tomorrow, she thought, he was saying he would come back tomorrow, before leaving. Silent Fox walked around her property with purposeful movements, checking her chicken coop, examining her fence posts, and testing the security of her barn door. He pointed out several problems: loose boards, a gap where predators could enter, and a water trough that needed repair. His concern for her welfare was obvious and touching. As he prepared to disappear back into the landscape, Silent Fox paused and spoke carefully in English. "Not alone now." The words were simple, but they carried more comfort than any of the sympathy she had received from well-meaning townspeople. Sarah watched him walk away with the same silent grace that had brought him into her life. She couldn't see exactly where he went, but she knew he would be watching over her from somewhere in the hills. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah realized something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer a desperate widow crying to be left alone. She had found an unexpected friend in the most unlikely person imaginable. The fear that had dominated her life since Thomas's death was beginning to transform into something new: hope. She fell asleep clutching the beautiful knife Silent Fox had given her, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges but also new possibilities. Her isolation was ending, but in a way she never could have predicted. Sometimes, she reflected, the help we need comes from directions we never thought to look. True to his word, Silent Fox returned the following afternoon when the sun reached its highest point. Sarah had spent the morning in nervous preparation, unsure what to expect from this unprecedented friendship. She had baked extra bread and prepared coffee, hoping to offer hospitality despite the language barriers between them. When she saw him approaching from the tree line, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and excitement. Yesterday's meeting had felt almost like a dream, and part of her had worried she might have imagined the whole encounter. But here he was, moving with that same quiet confidence, carrying what appeared to be tools made from wood and bone. Silent Fox had brought materials to help repair the problems he had identified around her farm. Without waiting for permission, he began working on the loose boards in her chicken coop, his movements efficient and skilled. Sarah watched in amazement as he secured the structure using techniques that required no nails or metal hardware, only clever joinery and strong cord made from plant fibers. "Let me help," Sarah said, moving closer to observe his work. Silent Fox paused and studied her for a moment, then nodded and began showing her how to twist plant fibers into strong rope. Their first lesson in cooperation began with simple tasks, but Sarah quickly realized she was learning survival skills that could prove invaluable. Communication remained challenging, but they gradually developed a system combining simple English words, hand gestures, and drawings scratched in the dirt. Silent Fox proved to be a patient teacher, repeating demonstrations until Sarah understood each technique. In return, she shared her knowledge of cooking and preserving food, showing him how to bake bread and explaining her methods for storing vegetables through the winter months. Over the next several days, Silent Fox returned regularly to help with farm maintenance. He repaired her water trough using a technique that channeled rainwater more efficiently than the original design. He showed her how to identify and prepare edible plants that grew wild on her property, knowledge that could supplement her diet when store-bought supplies ran low. Most importantly, he helped her round up her scattered cattle using methods that seemed almost magical. Silent Fox could move among the animals without startling them, guiding them back toward the homestead with subtle gestures and soft sounds. Sarah learned that successful ranching required understanding animal behavior, not just physical strength. As they worked together, Sarah began to understand more about Silent Fox's background. Through careful questioning and patient listening, she learned that he had been separated from his band due to injuries sustained in a conflict with soldiers. His wife and child had died during a harsh winter when medicine and food were scarce. Like her, he was alone in the world, struggling to find purpose after devastating loss. The similarities in their situations created a bond that transcended cultural differences. Both were grieving, both were isolated, and both were trying to rebuild lives that had been shattered by circumstances beyond their control. They found comfort in shared work and mutual understanding, even when words failed them. Silent Fox taught Sarah practical skills that transformed her relationship with the land. She learned to read weather signs by observing cloud formations and wind patterns. He showed her how to track animals, identify their marks, and predict their movements. Most valuably, he taught her to move quietly through the landscape, making her less vulnerable to both human and animal threats. In return, Sarah shared aspects of her culture that fascinated Silent Fox. He was intrigued by her books, though he couldn't read them, and listened intently when she explained how written words could preserve knowledge across time and distance. He watched her cooking methods with great interest, particularly her techniques for preserving meat and vegetables. Their friendship deepened through small acts of trust. Sarah began leaving her door unlocked when Silent Fox was working nearby, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. He responded by bringing her gifts that showed increasing thoughtfulness: medicinal herbs when she developed a cough, perfectly shaped stones for her garden borders, and once, a small wooden carving of a bird that reminded her of the sparrows Thomas used to feed. The most significant breakthrough came when Silent Fox began speaking more English during their time together. His vocabulary was limited but growing, and Sarah realized he had been learning her language through careful observation during their interactions. She started teaching him words more deliberately, pointing to objects and repeating their names until he could pronounce them clearly. "Sarah, good friend," he said one afternoon as they finished repairing a section of fence. The words were simple, but they carried deep meaning for both of them. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized this was the first time since Thomas's death that anyone had called her friend. "Silent Fox, good friend too," she replied, and was rewarded with one of his rare but genuine smiles. Their partnership was not without challenges. Sometimes other travelers passed through the area, forcing Silent Fox to hide until they moved on. The constant need for secrecy reminded both of them how dangerous their friendship would be if discovered by the wrong people. Tensions between settlers and Comanche bands remained high, and neither community would understand or approve of their alliance. Sarah began to worry about what would happen when winter arrived. Silent Fox had mentioned that he planned to rejoin his people before the cold weather set in, but she couldn't bear the thought of being alone again. At the same time, she understood that staying would put him at risk if hostile settlers or soldiers discovered his presence. The question of their future together hung unspoken between them as autumn approached. Both knew that their current arrangement couldn't continue indefinitely, but neither wanted to address the difficult decisions that lay ahead. For now, they focused on preparing for winter and enjoying the unexpected friendship that had transformed both their lives. Sarah's farm was becoming more secure and productive thanks to Silent Fox's help, while his injuries had healed and his spirits had lifted through their companionship. What neither of them realized was that their careful balance was about to be disrupted by forces beyond their control. Change was coming to their isolated corner of Texas, and soon they would both face choices that would test everything they had built together. Their friendship had grown from desperate loneliness into genuine care and respect, but the greatest challenges still lay ahead. The real test of their bond would come when they were forced to choose between personal safety and loyalty to each other. The trouble arrived on a crisp October morning in the form of 5 mounted men wearing the blue uniforms of the U.S. Cavalry. Sarah was working in her garden when she heard the sound of horses approaching, and her blood turned cold when she recognized the military patrol. Silent Fox was supposed to arrive later that day, and she prayed he would see the soldiers and stay hidden in the hills. Captain Morrison, the patrol leader, dismounted and approached with the casual authority of a man accustomed to getting answers. He was middle-aged with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing as they surveyed Sarah's property. "Good morning, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm Captain Morrison from Fort Richardson. We're investigating reports of Comanche activity in this area." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Good morning, Captain. I haven't seen any trouble here." The lie came more easily than she expected, though she felt guilty for deceiving men who were supposedly protecting settlers like herself. "That's interesting," Morrison replied, walking closer to examine her garden. "Because your farm looks remarkably well maintained for a widow managing alone. Your fences are in excellent repair. Your livestock appear healthy and well tended, and your water system shows signs of recent improvement. Either you've become quite the handy woman since your husband's passing, or you've had help." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady. "I've been learning as I go. Thomas taught me some things before he died, and I've figured out the rest through trial and error." She gestured toward her vegetable garden, which was indeed flourishing thanks to Silent Fox's knowledge of natural fertilizers and irrigation techniques. Captain Morrison knelt to examine some tracks near her water trough, and Sarah's stomach lurched when she realized they were clearly made by moccasins rather than boots. "These are interesting prints, Mrs. Mitchell. Do you often walk around your property barefoot?" "Sometimes when the weather's warm," Sarah lied again, hoping her nervousness wasn't obvious. "It's more comfortable than wearing boots all day." The captain stood and brushed dirt from his hands, his expression skeptical. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to be direct with you. We've received reports of a Comanche warrior operating alone in this region. He's believed to be separated from his band and possibly wounded. Have you seen anything that might help us locate him? Sarah felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong word could destroy everything she and Silent Fox had built together. No, Captain. I haven't seen any Indians around here. The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. I see, Morrison said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe her entirely. Well, if you do encounter this individual, you should know that he's considered extremely dangerous. The Comanche are skilled warriors, and a desperate one operating alone might be unpredictable. Sarah wanted to defend Silent Fox, to explain that he was nothing like the savage the captain described, but she bit her tongue. I'll be careful, Captain. Thank you for the warning. We'll be patrolling this area regularly over the next few weeks, Morrison continued, remounting his horse. I strongly advise you to keep that rifle of yours loaded and ready. If you see anything suspicious, fire 3 shots in the air and we'll come running. After the soldiers rode away, Sarah collapsed onto her porch steps, shaking with fear and exhaustion. The encounter had lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. She kept replaying Morrison's words, wondering if she had said anything that might lead them back to her farm, with more serious suspicions. Silent Fox appeared an hour later, emerging from the tree line with obvious caution. He had clearly seen the soldiers and waited until they were gone before approaching. Blue coats? He asked, using the term he had learned for cavalry soldiers. Yes, Sarah replied, her voice still unsteady. They're looking for you. They know you're in the area. She tried to explain the conversation using their mixture of English words and hand gestures, watching as Silent Fox's expression grew increasingly grim. I go, he said simply, pointing toward the hills. Danger for Sarah! No! The word burst from her lips before she could stop it. You can't leave. Not yet. The thought of losing her only friend, of returning to the crushing loneliness she had endured before he arrived, was unbearable. Silent Fox shook his head sadly. Sarah safe more important than Silent Fox happy. His broken English couldn't hide the depth of his concern for her welfare. Here was a man who was willing to sacrifice his own safety to protect her from potential consequences of their friendship. The nobility of his gesture only made her more determined to find another solution. There has to be another way, Sarah insisted. You could hide here in the barn or the root cellar. The soldiers don't know for certain that you're here. They know, Silent Fox replied with certainty. Tracks everywhere. Smart blue coat see signs. He was right, of course. Captain Morrison had already noticed evidence of his presence, and continued surveillance would only reveal more proof. That evening, they sat together on Sarah's porch for what might be their last time, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Neither spoke much, but the weight of impending separation hung between them like a physical presence. My people winter camp 3 days north, Silent Fox finally said. I find them, stay safe until spring. He paused, struggling with the English words to express his thoughts. Sarah, you like sister now. Hard to leave sister. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. In just a few weeks, this man had become more than a friend. He had become family. You're like a brother to me too, she whispered. I don't know how I'll manage without you. Sarah strong, he replied firmly. Stronger than Sarah, no. You remember Thomas with happiness, not only sadness. Silent Fox teach that. They spent the next 2 days preparing for his departure and trying to secure the farm as much as possible for the coming winter. Silent Fox worked with desperate intensity, as if he could solve all her problems before leaving. He showed her how to preserve the medicinal herbs he had gathered, taught her additional techniques for managing livestock in cold weather, and even carved detailed maps in pieces of bark showing the locations of emergency shelter and clean water sources. On his final morning, Silent Fox presented Sarah with his most precious gift, a small leather pouch containing items that represented their friendship. Inside were smooth stones from the creek where they had first worked together, pressed flowers from her garden, and a tiny carved figure that looked like 2 people sitting side by side. You keep, he said, pressing the pouch into her hands. Remember Silent Fox? Remember Sarah not alone in world? Sarah gave him her own farewell gift, Thomas's pocket watch, the most valuable thing she owned. So you remember time we spent together, she explained. And so you remember that Sarah considers Silent Fox family forever. Silent Fox accepted the watch with reverence, understanding its significance even if he couldn't read its face. He tucked it carefully inside his shirt close to his heart. As he prepared to leave, Captain Morrison's patrol appeared on the horizon, riding hard toward the farm. Someone had reported seeing smoke from Sarah's chimney and suggested the soldiers investigate more thoroughly. "Hide," Sarah urged desperately, but Silent Fox shook his head. "No more hiding," he said with quiet dignity. Silent Fox make choice. What happened next would test everything they had learned about courage, loyalty, and the true meaning of friendship. The approaching soldiers represented not just immediate danger, but a fundamental challenge to the bond they had forged across cultural boundaries. Sarah watched in terror and admiration as Silent Fox walked calmly toward the approaching cavalry, his hands visible and empty, choosing to face whatever consequences awaited rather than put her at further risk. His act of courage would change both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Captain Morrison's horse reared as he spotted Silent Fox walking calmly across the open ground toward the patrol. The soldiers immediately drew their weapons, but something about the Comanche warrior's deliberate, non-threatening approach made Morrison raise his hand to signal his men to hold their fire. "That's far enough," Morrison called out when Silent Fox was still 50 yards away. "Put your hands where I can see them and don't move." Silent Fox stopped and raised both hands, standing perfectly still as the soldiers surrounded him. Sarah rushed from her porch, her heart pounding with terror for her friend's safety. "Captain Morrison, please don't hurt him." "Stay back, Mrs. Mitchell," Morrison ordered sharply. "This man is extremely dangerous." But even as he spoke, the captain seemed puzzled by the situation. The Comanche warrior showed no signs of aggression or fear, and Mrs. Mitchell was clearly concerned for his welfare rather than her own safety. "He's not dangerous," Sarah said desperately. "He's been helping me with the farm. He saved my life." Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene before him. The evidence was undeniable now. The well-maintained property, the obvious signs of skilled craftsmanship in the repairs, and, most tellingly, the widow's passionate defense of a man she should have feared above all others. "Sergeant Williams, keep your weapon trained on the prisoner," Morrison ordered as he dismounted. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to explain exactly what's been happening here." Sarah knew that lying further would be pointless and potentially dangerous for Silent Fox. Taking a deep breath, she began to tell the truth. She described her desperate loneliness after Thomas's death, the mysterious gifts that had appeared on her property, and the gradual development of trust and friendship between herself and Silent Fox. "He never threatened me," she emphasized. "Not once. He helped me survive when I was ready to give up on everything. He fixed my tools, taught me about the land, and showed me kindness when I needed it most." Morrison listened with growing amazement to her account. In 15 years of military service on the frontier, he had never heard anything like this story. The idea of a Comanche warrior providing aid to a white settler without expecting anything in return challenged everything he thought he knew about the relationship between their peoples. "Mrs. Mitchell," Morrison said slowly, "do you understand that harboring a hostile Indian is a serious offense? You could be charged with treason against the United States." "Then charge me," Sarah replied with more courage than she felt, "because I won't pretend that Silent Fox is my enemy when he's been the best friend I've had since my husband died." Silent Fox, who had been listening to this exchange in silence, suddenly spoke up in his careful English. "Captain Sarah, tell truth. Silent Fox help because Sarah good person alone need friend. No want to hurt white people. No want trouble for Sarah." Morrison stared at the Comanche warrior in shock. Not only was he speaking English, but his words showed a level of understanding and reasoning that contradicted every stereotype about savage Indians. "You speak our language." "Little bit," Silent Fox replied. "Sarah teach many words." Silent Fox learned fast. "Why did you help her?" Morrison asked bluntly. "What did you hope to gain?" Silent Fox considered the question carefully before answering. "Silent Fox lose wife, lose baby, lose home. Same like Sarah lose husband, lose happiness. Sadness, same in all people. Help Sarah, help Silent Fox remember good things still possible in world." The captain was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with a situation that didn't fit any of his preconceptions. Finally, he turned to his sergeant. "Williams, lower your weapon." "Sir?" the sergeant asked uncertainly. "I said lower it," Morrison repeated firmly. "This man isn't threatening anyone." Sarah felt a surge of hope, but she could see that Morrison was still wrestling with his duty as a military officer. Captain, what happens now? That's a good question, Mrs. Mitchell. Technically, I should arrest both of you. Morrison walked closer to Silent Fox, studying him intently. But I've never encountered a situation quite like this one. What followed was the most unusual negotiation in Captain Morrison's military career. Silent Fox explained that he had been planning to rejoin his people before winter, and Morrison realized that arresting him would only create problems for everyone involved. A Comanche prisoner would require a military escort to the nearest fort, leaving the area less protected. More importantly, prosecuting Mrs. Mitchell for helping someone who had clearly saved her life would be both unjust and unpopular with local settlers. I'm going to make you both an offer, Morrison said finally. Silent Fox, if you give me your word that you'll leave this area and rejoin your people peacefully, I'll let you go. Mrs. Mitchell, if you promise to report any future Indian activity to the authorities, I'll forget what I've seen here today. You have my word, Silent Fox replied immediately. Sarah hesitated, knowing this meant accepting the end of her friendship with Silent Fox. I promise, Captain. But Morrison wasn't finished. However, he continued, Mrs. Mitchell, your situation concerns me. A woman alone on a remote farm faces many dangers, not all of them from Indians. Have you considered moving closer to town? This is my home, Sarah replied. Thomas and I built this place together. I can't abandon it. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. In that case, I'm going to recommend that the territorial government provide you with some assistance. A woman who can turn a potential enemy into an ally might be exactly what we need to improve relations between settlers and local tribes. 6 months later, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed man from the territorial capital arrived to offer her a position as a liaison between white settlers and peaceful Indian bands. Her unique experience with Silent Fox had impressed officials who were looking for new approaches to reduce frontier conflicts. Sarah accepted the position, which allowed her to keep her farm while traveling to facilitate communication between different communities. She never saw Silent Fox again, but she received occasional gifts left on her property: a perfectly crafted basket, medicinal herbs, or small carved animals. She knew he was keeping his promise to rejoin his people, but also keeping watch over her from a distance. Years later, when Sarah had become a respected peacemaker known throughout Texas, she would tell the story of how a desperate widow's cries for solitude had been answered by the most unlikely guardian imaginable. Her tale of friendship across cultural boundaries inspired others to look beyond fear and prejudice toward understanding and cooperation. The lonely farm where Thomas was buried became a symbol of hope rather than loss. Sarah eventually remarried, but she never forgot the Comanche warrior who had taught her that family could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the help we need comes from directions we never thought to look. Silent Fox's silent act of compassion had indeed changed everything, transforming a story of despair into one of hope, connection, and the enduring power of human kindness to bridge even the deepest divides.